Welcome to this Word and Excel 2016 Tips, Tricks and Shortcuts session. I'm Donna Hanson and I look forward to taking you through the journey on Word and Excel. So in the Word segment, we're going to focus on a whole lot of tips and shortcuts. Now the idea here isn't to remember them all, but pick one or two that are going to immediately impact on your productivity. You have a short period of time to access this webinar, so make sure you get at least one or two things that are going to leverage your value. Even if it's just a couple of things in Word and a couple of things in Excel. Don't try to remember it all because it's not like riding a bike. Once you get back on, it's easy to remember everything. With Word and Excel, if you don't use it, you will lose it. So pick and choose the things that are right for you right now and know that a week or 2 weeks further down the track, you may well have different needs. That's okay. So here's some selection techniques. If I click once in the margin, it selects the line of text. If I do a double click, it selects a paragraph. Now a paragraph is a piece of text with an enter after it. So the minute I press enter, it's a new paragraph or a new thought. And a triple click selects the entire document, and you're probably overcome with excitement by that, and I can understand it. And you're probably thinking to yourself, when might I use that? It's the same as Control A, and unfortunately in the Microsoft suite of products there can be half a dozen ways to do exactly the same thing. So what we're going to do here is, if you have a document, say a letter that just goes over onto a second page, you might want to bring it back so it's all on one page. So all you need to do here is hold down the Control key on your keyboard and press the left square bracket. That decreases the font size by 1 point. And down in the bottom left hand corner of your screen it says page 1 of 1. So if this was on 2 pages, as you decrease the font size it would reduce back down to page 1 of 1. Control and the right square bracket increases it by 1 point. It's useful for when you need the visual. You really need it to be on a page. You don't necessarily worry about the size, the font size, etc. Now you'll notice that the font size and type on this particular document is Calibri and it's 11 points. Depending on how your Word is set up and what you're working with, you may not want that as your default. So let's have a quick look at how you might go about changing your default font. Now remembering, as we're looking at these things, not only are they useful for you, but these are pieces of information you can be passing on to your clients as well to add additional value. So to set the default font, we click on this little dialog launcher here, this little marker. It brings out a pop-up box about the font, and from here you could choose your typeface and font size that you want. So it might be Arial, it might be regular, it might be 12 points. You'll notice down the bottom left here it says set as default. Now if you click this option, you will get a dialog box that asks you, do you want to apply that just to this document or to all documents based on the normal template? So at any point in time you can change this so that it reflects the typeface that your clients have as the default or that you have as the default. So the normal template means every blank document you open. So you choose your relevant option and you click OK to come out. So that's the first thing that you need to know. There's a whole lot of keyboard shortcuts in Word as well. Control and Home will always take you back to the start of the document, and Control and End will always take you back to the end of the document. If I have a word, say this word powerful, and I want to make it red and I want to make it bold. Now let's just say I wanted to apply those characteristics to another piece of text in the document. Rather than have to go and select the text and make it bold and red, I can use the Format Painter. Now you may have used the Format Painter before. It takes the formatting attributes of the text you're currently on and enables you to paint them elsewhere. A single click will allow you to do it once, but if you double click on the Format Painter, you can then select information, double click and choose paragraphs or highlight pieces of text, and it will apply that same formatting. Once you've finished, you can either come up and click on the Format Painter to switch it off, or simply press the Escape key in the top left hand corner of your keyboard and it will automatically forget what it's remembered there. Often you'll put bullets in your documents, so the little bulleted option up here, you've probably used this feature before. When you switch the bullets on, it slightly indents. So I'm just going to put in dog And if I press enter, now remembering every time I press enter, that starts a new paragraph. So it's telling Word it's a new idea or a new thought. So you can see by default, Word's automatically put a bullet there, and I can type in cat and I can type in bird. Now, at any point in time, if I have a need to put some items underneath dog, say I want to have breeds of dog, I know if I press enter, I'm going to get another bullet. But what I really want to do is continue on with this thought. So I want to start a new line, but not a new paragraph. And I do this by holding down the shift key on the keyboard and pressing enter. And it starts a new line, but not a new paragraph. So I can pop in some extra text, and the data sits there, the text sits there. Now you'll notice that it just looks like it's on a new line. It's not until I come up here and switch on this backwards P, which is called the show hide. Some of you may find it annoying, but what it is it's great for troubleshooting. So you can see down here what it's done is it shows you where the bullet is. The arrow tells you that there's a tab stop there, so it automatically tabulates. And the little bendy arrow is a soft return. The backwards P is a hard return, so you press the enter key, but the arrow key is a soft return, which is shift and enter or start a new line but not a new paragraph. So there's my information there. Now let's say I actually wanted to have multi-level bullets and numbers like you might have in an agenda. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up here to our multi-level bullets and numbers, and I'd have to choose the list that I would want. So in this case, what it would do with this first option displaying is the main heading would be numbered. The secondary heading, so slightly indented, would be lettered, so letters of the alphabet with lowercase, and the third level would be Roman numerals. In a lot of instances, what you want here may not be that. This is probably the most common one, the 1, 1.1, 1.11, etc. So I'm going to click on that. So it comes up with our first one, and I'm going to put in dog, and I'm going to press enter. Then when I press tab, you'll see it creates 1.1. So I'm going to type in Labradoodle, and then it automatically goes to number 2, and I could type in Groodle, so 1.2. And then when I press enter again, you'll notice it goes to 1.3. Now in order to get it back so that it's number 2, for example, what I need to do is come up here to our decrease indent, and if I click on that, you will see that it elevates that numbering back up to the second digit. So these things are really handy when you're editing text or you're creating documents for your clients. Here's a few little tips and tricks for making your documentation look nice and making it easy to format. So I'm going to type in 3 hyphens and press enter, and you'll notice that it puts in a straight line. This is really good. In the old days, you might have put your finger on the full stop key until it goes to the end of the margin and finishes off there. 3 equal signs, which is just there, and enter gives you a double line. 3 hash symbols, shift and the number 3, gives you a thin, thick, thin line, and 3 asterisks, which is shift and the number 8, puts in a dotted line. So they're handy techniques, and I often use those in headers and footers to delineate between what's in the documentation and what's in the footer. So for example, a page number. So if I was activating something like this, you can see here we have a slightly grey area here in our picture. That's telling me that this area where my cursor is now located, is considered the footer. So if I double click in there, it activates the footer for me, and it also activates a range of tools and shortcuts. Now, if you were going to use headers and footers in your document, which you probably may, you would generally find that your first page of the document, you don't want things like a page number on. You often want different things. You might want your cover page to be nice and clean. So the first thing you might do is choose different first page. And when you do that, you'll notice down the bottom here it says first page footer. This enables you to have a different header and footer on the first page to subsequent pages. So in this one, I might have nothing, or I might have 3 hyphens and press enter, and I might want something like the web address. And I might want, if I tab across to the right, you'll see that there's a right hand or right aligned marker, and I may wish to put in the page number. So I can click up here. We have options to put it at the top of the page, the bottom of the page. Because I'm in my footer, I'm going to choose current position, and I can select what I want. If I come back to the home tab, I can see that that data is Calibri 11, so I might want to reduce the font size, just to make it look a little less obvious. If I double click, that header or that footer is now in the bottom of that document, and I could do the same thing with a header in my document. You'll notice first page header, useful if you're going to have letterhead, but subsequent pages maybe not. If I want to insert a page break quickly, Control and Enter forces a page break, and because I have the Show Hide switched on, you'll see the page break displaying on the screen. The benefit of this is if I want to have something that stays on this page above, I know that I need to be before the page break. If I want something on the next page, it needs to be after the page break. So you'll notice here on our first page, if we click here, double click here, first page footer, and if I come down to the second page, you'll notice at the bottom it says footer, but it hasn't linked to the previous one because the two are separate. So you have one footer that is designed for your cover type page and subsequent footers for other information. So those elements are really handy to be across and to know. If I double click, it deselects the header footer area. Now down here, what I am now going to do is I'm going to look at inserting a table. Now you may have inserted a table before. You can do that through Insert, Table, and you can choose the number of columns and rows, but you'll notice when you rest your mouse pointer on those, in this case a 4-column by 2-row table, you'll notice that all 4 columns are evenly spaced apart and they're spread apart between the margins. Often that isn't what you want. So think, for example, maybe minutes or an agenda where you might have a single column at the start where you might put in an item number, a bigger section next where you might have all the text about what's going to be discussed and any sort of supporting information, and you might have a third column which has action items, so an action for whoever is attending the meeting. So for example, I might want to create something with that framework rather than me having to resize. So a quick way to create a new table is to put in a plus sign, press some spaces just to represent the width of your first column, another space, some more spaces. So remembering this is the description area that I'm going to have, a plus, some more spaces, and another plus to close that off. Now, once I've said, okay, that's what I want, I can just press enter and Word automatically creates a simplistic table. And I know you're probably sitting there thinking to yourself, Donna, my life will never be the same again. And I can understand that. But realistically, when I create a table, I generally want more than one row. Well, any table, regardless of whether it's one you've created or an existing one, if you click in the last cell and press the tab key, it will automatically add another row. So you can keep doing that at any point in time. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put in item number, description, action by. So, and I might make that bold so that it looks nice. So I'm just doing a Control B there to save me having to go to the Home tab. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep pressing the Tab key until this drops over to another page. So we go on to another page and you'll notice the table just continues on. So we have no headings on the second page. And the most common thing I see people do is they copy and paste this first heading section and paste it down the bottom on the second page. But the problem with that is if I add something up here in this part of the table, it pushes everything down and my headings will be part way down the table, which makes it look unprofessional. So what you can do, particularly if other people are going to be working on this document that has the table in it, You can go to the Table Tools tab, which is activated because we actually have a table active. You can choose the Layout tab, and from here you can choose Repeat Header Rows. Now when you choose that, what it does is if we scroll down the screen, it actually replicates those headings. So Word automates, and these are the fantastic tools that can save you a huge amount of time. And it could be useful if, for example, you're setting up some templates for your clients. So let's just say, for example, this was a template that you were setting up for a client and you've set it all up with the draft information. Maybe it's the details of the common items that they'll be discussing at their upcoming meeting, etc. Maybe it's some statistics that need to be presented for a discussion. If at any point in time you create a document and you want to save it as a template, so whether it's something you reuse, etc., you can just go to the File tab, and if you choose Save As, and from here you just want to go to wherever it is you're going to save it, and in the option here you're going to choose Word Macro Enabled Template. By default, it's gone to a Custom Office Templates area of the computer that you work on, and we pop a file name in here and we click Save. Now I chose Macro Enabled Workbook just in case at a later stage you want to actually create a macro for this template. So this is called Table. I'm now going to close the document down and reopen it. Well, actually, instead of reopening it, I want to open that template. So if I go to File, and then I go to New, and I go to Personal, and you'll notice here it says Table. So I'm going to click on that. So it's popped my document in here, and you'll see there's the table information. So that's a really handy tool for repetitive stuff. I'm going to go Control End. That will take us to the end of the document. Now I want to talk about some simplistic copying and pasting. Now one of the most common things people will do is they'll want to be able to copy and paste data from Excel into a Word document. Now copying from Excel to Word isn't so bad, but one of the most common things might be where you're trying to copy a budget, for example, and it's actually a landscape page that you want to put into your portrait document. Back in the old days, you could print out the Excel spreadsheet and pop it in with the paperwork that was portraited in Word, but now you need to combine things together. So I'm going to show you what you need to know to be able to insert an Excel worksheet that might be landscaped into a Word document. So the first thing we need to know about is something called a section break. Now a section break enables me to break up a document a bit like I would a chapter in a book. So when you get to chapter 2, you don't want the header at the top, for example, to say chapter 1, do you? So we need to create a section break to allow us to change things like the headers and the footers or the layout of the page. So to do this, we go to Layout, Breaks. Now there's a whole range of different breaks, and you can see the page break there that we talked about before, which was Control Enter. Down the bottom there are 4 different section breaks. There's a break that inserts and starts a new page, starts that new section on a new page. There's a continuous, which would enable us to break up a section within a same page, and an even and an odd page to enable you to have text that might appear at the top or the bottom of the page that appears only on an even page or only on an odd page. But the one we're focused on today is next page. So I'm going to click on that. And you can see visually on the screen that the page break has been made. Now the key thing here is having the show hide switched on, because this enables you to see what's happening in your document when you're doing something like this. Now from here I could go to orientation and change it straight to landscape, but I want to take you in via the dialog launcher. And the reason for that is I'm going to choose landscape here, but I want you to see this piece here. So it's only going to apply landscape to this section of the document. So if we click OK, so you'll see you now have portrait and landscape. And the next thing is to actually locate the document that you want to copy or you want to insert into this Word document. So I'm just going to go and grab that now. So I've opened up Excel and I just want to grab this piece of information. So the first thing I'm going to do is highlight it. and then I'm going to go Control C, which copies it. And I'm going to come back to my Word document. Now, there's a couple of things here I need to know. If I go back to the Home tab and I choose Paste, if I do a straight copy and paste, it just pops the data into Word, but it doesn't take into account a couple of things. So the first option here is just your straight copy and paste. When you choose this option, it keeps the source formatting. So the typeface and the font will be exactly the same as in the Excel spreadsheet. You may not want that, especially if you have different typefaces, but you will notice that all the numbers are right aligned in this instance. The second option uses destination styles. Now you'll see that the formatting has changed, the colors have disappeared, the text is now in line with the Word document, but the other thing you'll also notice is that the numbering is left aligned. So the numbering has changed slightly between those two different options. The third option links your data back to the Excel worksheet. So providing you don't change the file name of either of these files, there will be a link between the two. So if the Excel worksheet updates, it will automatically follow through into the Word document. The fourth option there, it links the data but uses the Word look and feel. The next option, the fifth option, allows you to put it in as a picture, which means that it cannot be edited, but it can be resized. And the last option strips out all the formatting and removes the table layout and instead replaces it with tab stops to represent the various columns. So it's really important that you make the selection that is going to fast track your productivity. So just a straight copy and paste means it looks like Excel and then you end up having to format your text. So choose the option that's most appropriate to you. I'm going to choose this one here. So it pops our data in. Now I'm back on the previous page and you'll notice if I double click in the footer, I'm just going to pop the page numbering in the current page here. So there's our information there. Now the only challenge is I've got a section header here and it's automatically picked up first page of section 1, and I could choose to switch that off if I wanted, but I want to leave that on because I want this one to be blank. So I'm going to take that footer out because this footer here will actually appear on the side of the page, and what I really want is I want to have a page number down the bottom, because down the bottom here when I print this physically out is where the page numbering is going to appear on every page. So what I need to do is duplicate this down here. So here's a little bit of a tricky piece that you need to do. If we go to the Insert tab and we're going to choose Shapes and the text box, and I'm going to just sort of pick a spot which might be similar to where I would put that, or that page number might be on the portrait page. And in there I'm going to go to Insert, Page Number, Current Position, and I'm going to choose the same page number style. Now I think it was this one. And you'll notice that the page numbering is not quite right, so we need to go and click on the border of that box, and we're going to choose Format, Text Direction, and we want to rotate it like this so that when we actually print the page out, this page number is at the bottom of the page. Now the last thing we want to do here is we want to remove any outlines. So see how this box automatically has a outline on it. So we just need to go to Shape Outline and No Outline. So now we have our page numbering in the proper spot. So whilst it looks different here, when you print it out, this will be at the bottom of the page. Now if I want to insert a page break, Control Enter inserts the page break. And now I can go back to the Layout tab, Breaks, and Next Page, which is what I've got here. So I needn't have done the page break, I could have done that either way. And I want to go to Orientation and I want to choose Portrait. So now what you can see is you've got one page in there and another one there. So I'm going to take that page break out, and there we go. So Portrait, Landscape, Portrait. Now the last thing I want to do in the Word section is show you about something called styles in Word. Now all a style is the name we give to a range of formatting attributes. So for example, I could create a style and I could call it the Donna style, And I could make it bold, red, and underlined. And any headings in my document that have that same style, when I change my mind and decide instead of red I want it to be purple, I can change one and it will automatically update all the rest. So Word has a range of inbuilt styles. So you can see here I've got heading 1, heading 2. It actually goes up to 8 different headings. Heading 1 being the title heading, heading 2 meaning a secondary heading, heading 3 tertiary, etc. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply heading 1 to this one, heading 2 to Tuesday, heading 1 to Wednesday, heading 1 to Thursday, and heading 2 to Friday. Now you'll notice because I've got the show hide switched on, there's a little dot beside each day of the week. That is telling me that there is a style applied to this piece of text. So what I want to do now is I want to change the font because maybe I don't like the color or the typeface. So if I double click on Monday and I'm going to change it to Arial, so I'm going to click the drop arrow here, Arial, 16 points is fine, but I want the color to be black. So I've done that, but you'll notice Wednesday and Thursday hasn't changed. If I come up here to heading 1 and I right click and choose update heading 1 to match selection, and there we go. There's our information there. It's followed that through and updated that for us. I can do the same with my Tuesday and Friday. So the benefit of that is it keeps your headings consistent, and also what we can do is we can then leverage Word to create a table of contents. So it picks up those styles and generates a table of content. So I once had a client who'd created a contract over a period of time, and what had actually happened was they were manually creating a table of contents. Every time something changed, they needed to update it, and it eventually got to around 100 pages. And so because it was a legal document, it was really, really hard because it meant that every time something changed, there was a risk that the table of contents hadn't been updated and the relevant item wasn't being referenced. So it's really important with documentation, particularly longer documentation, that you start how you mean to continue. So you want to make life easier not only for yourself but for the receiver or the reader of your documentation. So here we're going to create a table of contents leveraging on those styles. So to do this, I go to References, Table of Contents, and pick a layout. I'm going to choose the second one because it has a heading that says Table of Contents. And you'll notice it's got the first level headings and the second level headings. So if I change Tuesday to say a heading 1 style, you'll notice that this doesn't update. You need to right click and choose Update Entire Field and Entire Table. And what it does is it refreshes. So you can see here your data is all selected. At any point in time, if this data goes on to another page, so Control and Enter, and I come back up, right click, Update Field and Entire Document. These also act as hyperlinks, so at any point in time you can put your mouse pointer on one of these hyperlinks and control and click. So this is a great navigation tool when you're giving your documentation to somebody else. So that's Word. That's some tips, tricks and shortcuts in Word. So what are the 1 or 2 things that you're going to implement that will enable you to work smarter and not harder from now onwards with Word? So now we're on to the Excel segment. I love Excel. There's so much you can do with it. So let's have a look at some shortcuts to start off with. So first of all, if I put a date in here, most people will recognize that the slash is a designated format for dates. However, you might find sometimes you get people that actually put it in with the full stops. Now you'll notice when you look at this that the first date with the slashes in it has right aligned, and the one with the decimals or the dots has left aligned. So whenever Excel sees something that it is not a number or it can't perform a calculation on, it will automatically left align it. So at the moment, if you were trying to do a calculation one date to another, you couldn't do this on this cell. It needs to be formatted in a format that Excel recognizes as a date format. So one quick tip you could do is, particularly if you're working with a client's worksheet where it's pulled this data out, It's got the dots, and you don't want to have to go through and manually change it all. Select the relevant column or row and just go to Find and Select and choose Replace. And you want to replace the full stop with the slash, and click Replace All and OK. And that's the quick way of fixing that. So it might seem simplistic, but sometimes we make things harder than it needs to be. Now, if you look at those two dates, most people, by looking at a date, won't necessarily know what day of the week that day is. And sometimes you'll want a list of dates that are just weekdays, aren't sequential days. So we know if we drag down with the left mouse key, you can see on the right with the little pop-up box, it's adding one day to the date. But if you drag down using your right mouse key, so all the right mouse key does is brings up a shortcut menu, and you choose what you want with the left key. So you can see here I've got an option to fill weekdays. So I click on that and I can see that the 24th was in fact a Friday, because 25th and 26th are missing. So I could right click on row number 6. Notice how I've selected the whole row, so Excel knows automatically when I go to insert, I want to insert a row. So I'm going to click Insert and it pops that in. If I come further down here, I can see that it's also jumped the 1st and the 2nd of April. Because the last action I did was inserted a row, if I now press the F4 key on the keyboard, you can see that it repeats the last action, and I can repeat that down here again. Now that's a multi-purpose tool, the F4 key. It will repeat the last action in Word or Excel. I'm just going to go to this worksheet. You're probably all familiar with using Autosum to add things up. It adds relative to the column that it's situated in. So it assumes because I have numbers above, you want to add the numbers above and put the result in the cell where you started the formula. To copy the formula, you can drag using the fill cross, and you'll notice when you drag, it copies relative to the new location. So it assumes because you've copied the formula from here to here, you in fact want to reference the cells directly above and not these ones. A faster way to actually add up all this data in one go is to highlight all the data and leave the edge of the selection as to where you want the answers to go, and then click Autosum and it automatically populates for you. You can do a quick double check by going, okay, equals sum, so that's those 4 cells. And if I want to double check these, I can highlight these ones, and down the very bottom of the screen here, you can see it says sum, and that number matches up with this number. At any point in time, you can click and hold down Control on the keyboard and select cells that aren't next to each other, and it will also provide a sum down the bottom for you. Handy things with regard to creating graphs. So often what you want to do is graphically represent your data. So a quick way of doing this is highlighting your data and then pressing the F11 key on the keyboard. That automatically generates a basic column graph. Now the key thing you need to know is if you're doing this on a laptop, it may require the use of an additional key such as a function key, depending upon what your keyboard layout is. So just take a look at the different keys and notice whether you need to hold down the function key when you press F11 in order for it to activate. So it's created a basic chart here for us, and we can easily choose switch row or column to flick how the data is being charted. Chart title can be edited by double clicking at the top. Can also add in chart elements. So for example, you might want to put data labels at the outside edge. It can be a great way of visually showing what those numbers are, as well as being able to see it in comparison. Be warned, if you go to copy and paste this chart as it is at the moment into a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation, it's going to be over 16,000 rows to the right, columns to the right, and over 1 million rows down. So if you're going to copy and paste this somewhere, the best thing I recommend is to move the chart and make it an object in this case, quarter 1. In the real world, you'll know what this data relates to. And if you click OK. So there's our chart. We could have that sitting there and giving us some information. Let's say, for example, we wanted to get rid of this particular data series, item C, and maybe we wanted to get rid of this one. Maybe we wanted to flip the data over and we'll get rid of that one. as well. If you want to add something in, so at the moment you've only got 3 items, 3 areas sitting in there, northern, southern and eastern. If I wanted to add in, just say this data here, I could select it, and this is the same size block as this data, and I'm going to copy it. And then if I right click on my chart, I can choose paste, and you can see that it pops that data in. And to get rid of that little flashing marquee, just press the escape key on the keyboard, and you can see that you have the headings selected and the items as well. So that's a really handy tool, and you could go back to the earlier part of our webinar where we talked about copying and pasting a landscape piece of information from Excel into Word. You could now copy and paste this chart from Excel into Word, and you could make the choices when you choose to paste as to whether you want a link or whether you want the formatting to look like Word or stay the same as it is in Excel. So that's some simple charts in Excel 2016. When you import data from another source, such as an accounting package, it'll come into Excel in a format that needs to be tidied up before you can actually do some work. So Excel has a preference for making life easier for you when you want to data analyze information. So when the data comes in, it's really important that there are column headings and there are no blank rows. And there are no blank columns. You can have a blank cell, but if you have a blank column or row, Excel will stop looking, and it will require you, if you want to incorporate data beyond that section, to manually select that information. So that can be time consuming and frustrating and full of risk. So what we want to do is try and set up our spreadsheets in such a way so that Excel does the heavy lifting for us. So some of the key things that you'll find when you first bring data in from Excel is into Excel, you might find you have things like this, merged headings. Helps if I can spell. So for example, the heading will come in and it will be merged between 2 cells. If that is a column heading, when you come to sorting your data, Excel will give you an error message. So there must not be any merged cells. So if you get an error message, or you can see clearly that you have something that is living between 2 cells, they're merged like that, you need to unmerge it. If you're not sure where that occurs in your spreadsheet, you might want to choose just this little icon here and merge and center to enable you to remove any merging and centering that might be in your document or in your spreadsheet, and making it harder for you to do data analysis. So before we come back and have a look at some of the things beyond the basics that of sorting and filtering that you can do with this set of data, I'm going to look at some of the things that you might need to do to clean up your dirty data that's come out of another system. So the first thing you might need to do is maybe you've got information where you have 2 pieces of information and they're contained in the one cell. What you actually need to do is pull those 2 apart to enable you to, in this case, sort and filter by last name or first name. So this could be a product line, it could be customer details, it could be a contact name at a customer for one of your bookkeeping clients. So what I'm going to do is highlight this data here, because that's the data I want to impact. Go to Data, Text to Columns. Characters such as commas or tabs separate each field. We'll click Next. Now in this case there's a space, so we take the tick out of the tab box and we put a tick in the space box. And a sidebar here, if you had a list of email addresses with a semicolon between each one, you could use this text to columns feature to actually split that apart so you had the email addresses in individual cells. You can already see what it's doing to my data here. Let's click Next. It converts numbers to numbers, dates to dates, and the remaining values to text. You can see the spacing there. If I click Finish, it splits the 2 apart. Now, if this was on a worksheet where you had data directly in the columns next to it, and you weren't quite sure how many columns it was going to split into, because of course you can't see everything that is in this worksheet if you had hundreds and hundreds of lines, for example. So if that was the case, I'd probably copy this first column, or the column with the data I want to split, or the column with the data I want to split, and put it into another worksheet, do the text to columns to pull it apart, run my eye through it, see if there's any that I need to join back together again, and have a look and see how many extra columns do I need to add in. So for example, if this spread out to say 3 columns, I would then need to add in another 2 columns because all the data was sitting in the first column. So that's text to columns. If we look at the next one, which is something called concatenate, it enables us to join things back together again. So if they've come in from another system and they're apart and you need to put them back together again before you can start doing your data analysis. So I want to join these two together, so I click on the Insert Function option and I'm going to look for Concatenate. It joins several text strings into one text string, so I'm going to click OK. And the cells I want to add together are this one plus this one. However, if you have a look here, you'll notice that there's no space. So what I need to do is take this one out here and actually press the space bar. And then come down to this one and click on the other cell. So the beauty of this is when you follow the insert function, you don't have to worry about typing any of the formula. Excel does all the heavy lifting in the background, so that means it reduces the risk of you not putting something in correctly, etc. And you can see here up to 255 cells can be added together. So I'll click OK. Now, because I have data directly attached to this column, if I double click, it copies the formula all the way down till it hits a blank row. Now what I want to do is take the contents of that formula and paste them to column A. Now the key thing here is I no longer want the formula because the formula is actually fixed my data. I want it to replace the data that's in column A. So I just want to do a copy by going Control C. And I've clicked on the Home tab and now I want to paste it. Now in Excel we have, I think it's around 15 different options. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 options. And in this instance, what we want is paste values. So we want the result of the formula, not the formula itself. It's not like it's dynamic, so if something changes, we need it to update. We want the fixed data, so adding those two cells back together. So if we choose values, it pops it there, and I would just delete these two columns. And there's our data ready to go. Now the next thing that you might need to tidy up before you can perform any data analysis is casing. So sometimes there might be things that come in upper casing, lower casing, or mixed casing like what we have here. We choose the FX or insert function and we're going to choose proper. So it converts the text string into proper case. So the first letter in each word's uppercase and all others are lowercase. And all I need to do is click on the cell. And you can see here in the example that it's fixed it. And I'll click OK. Now I'm going to fill that down. Now as a side note, you can also replace the word proper with lower if you want the text to be lowercase, or upper if you want the text to be uppercase. So that's some formatting and structure that you can change when your data comes in from another system. So let's now have a look at some simplistic and a little more advanced searching and analysing of our data. So some basic sorting and filtering here. You can click on your sort and filter and click the filter icon, and you can then sort and filter based upon criteria in that particular column. I'm going to choose to switch that off and I'm going to choose custom sort. So it makes it easier once our data has no blank rows, no blank columns, and it's all presented in a format that Excel likes. So we're going to do a multi-level sorting or an advanced sorting where you sort by multiple criteria in one go. So for example, I could sort by client, then by state, and then by order amount. And when I click OK, all of those columns are sorted at once. So rather than me having to have the drop arrows and do one and then do the next, etc. So that is more advanced sorting through the custom sort feature in Excel. Now the next level that you might want to do is you've got all this data here and maybe you want to subtotal it. Now, subtotals are useful for quickly summarizing a list of data, but there must be no blank rows or blank columns. So let's say I wanted to subtotal the data based upon the client. So the first thing I need to do is I need to sort alphabetically by the column that I'm sorting or that I'm wanting to subtotal by. Then we go to data and we're going to go to subtotal. And I'm going to choose the change in client. Sum is the default in this instance, and I'm going to choose order amount because I want it to add up all the order amounts. When I click OK, it creates this little outline. If I click on number 1, it tells me the grand total of all of those entries in that list. Number 2 shows me a subtotal based on each one, and I can click the little plus sign to expand that particular category. Now recognize I didn't do anything. I did not create any formulas. Excel did it all through the subtotal option based primarily on the fact that our data was in list-based information with no blank columns or blank rows. I'm going to click subtotal and remove all to get rid of that. Now the next type of data analysis that you might want to do on this type of data is something called a pivot table. Now all a pivot table is enables you to take something similar to a subtotal and summarize your data and just shift it about a bit so that you know you can manipulate and move about different ideas. So if we go to insert, pivot tables. And by the way, in this version of Excel, you also have a recommended pivot tables. So it can actually lay out some information to save you having to do any heavy lifting at all. So this is by state, this one's by state, this one's account, this one's by order by client. So you could choose one of these options, or alternatively I can choose pivot table. This is the data that I want to analyze. Creates a separate worksheet tab, and all I need to do is if I was wanting to lay this out visually, where would I want things to go? So let's just say I want the state information to go here, and I want the client information to go in rows. And then I want the order amount to appear over here. So what it's done is created a little summary of that information. I can highlight this, right click and choose value field settings, number format, and I can change the number format so that it's currency with 0 decimal places. And OK. Looks a little nicer, doesn't it? Now, 2 new features that came in with 2016 are something called a slicer. So a slicer enables you to slice up your data in your pivot table even further. So for example, I could go by state and click OK. Now, whilst I have 3 different states here and here, I can use this slicer to click on a state and it alters the pivot table to display just that particular data. If I want to remove all of the slices, I simply click the clear filter option, and if I want to get rid of the slicer itself, I can delete that too. Additionally, we also have a feature called timeline. Now this feature will only be available if there's dates in your list of data. Now there were order dates. I'm going to click on insert timeline, order date shows up and we click OK. We now have a similar sort of bar, except what this enables me to do is have a look at timelines. So here's the fun bit. I have to remember where we actually have data, what year we have data in. So there's December 2004, March 2005, May 2005. So it enables you to quickly refresh your pivot table based upon something that you might commonly want to further refine your data on. So that's a pivot table. Now if we come back to some of the data that we created before, I want to show you a few little shortcuts. So this is the first quarter of some data. Let's say I want to duplicate that because the layout and the formatting is exactly what I want. If I copy and paste it to a new worksheet, I'll often lose the formatting, the column widths, etc. But if I put my mouse pointer on the tab at the bottom, hold down the control key and drag to the right. See how the piece of paper has a plus on it? If I let go of the mouse and I let go of control, it creates an exact duplicate. So for example, I could come in here, I could change that to Q2. I could potentially empty all this data out, and when I get the new data, drop it in and the totals will automatically populate. I can also double click down the bottom to rename the worksheet tab. So any of these worksheet tabs you can rename. You can also right click and choose tab color. Now that might sound a little silly, but sometimes visually it's good to see things in different colors or in the same colors, and then you know they're related to each other. So if I want to duplicate this again, I simply drag and drop, and I can call this one Q3 and Q3 up here. And let's just say what I want to do now is I want to create a simple summary. So I'll put summary up here, and I want to delete all this data. So my goal here is basically to take B4, which is item A, from Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and have a total amount put in here. So the fastest way to do this is using something that we call three-dimensional formulas. Three-dimensional formulas. So what that is just the electronic equivalent of adding all those things together. So we type in an equal sign to tell Excel we're about to do some maths. Type in sum and open a set of brackets. I'm going to click on Q1 and the cell B4. You'll notice at the formula bar it says Q1 exclamation mark. Anytime you're looking at a formula and you see the exclamation mark, that tells you the text is to the left is the name of a worksheet tab. Handy, but if you can't find the worksheet tab, it could mean that the tab is actually hidden. More on that in a moment. If I hold down the Shift key on the keyboard and click on Q3, you'll notice it says the range between and including, that's represented by the colon between Q1 and Q3, and B4. And the sum at the front tells it you want to add. So in effect, we've got 54,000 in each one of those cells. So we should end up with 162,000. So there's our number there, and we can fill down. And because our formula copies relative to the new location, it assumes when you move down, you want to move down on all of the worksheets. And I can copy across like that. So that's called a three-dimensional formula. If I wanted to send a copy of this worksheet to somebody, I can simply right-click and choose Move or Copy, and New Book, and create a copy. And what that does is it creates a duplicate of that one worksheet, which I can then go to File and Share, and I can actually email it to someone. I'm going to close that one down now. I won't save it, and we'll come back to our original worksheet. So let's have a look at a couple more things that you'll find useful. First of all, let's have a look at VLOOKUP. So VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup. There are two lookups that are used, vertical and horizontal. Vertical is the most common. It looks up vertically down a list for something. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a VLOOKUP formula that looks over here for this item code and returns whatever the description is. This can be useful if you have generic pay rates, or you have product lines that have a fixed figure, etc. So the VLOOKUP function consists of 4 different arguments. That's what we call whatever's in brackets in Excel. So the VLOOKUP is the formula. The first argument is what are we going to look for. So we're going to be looking for this item code. So it's not the actual item code, but rather the contents of cell B9. Where do we want to look for it? We want to look for it over here. What column in the range is the answer you want in? So it's in the range of these cells here that we're looking up. It's in the second column. So what you're looking for must be in the first column and needs to be in alphabetic or ascending order. And the last argument says, do you want an exact match? So it might be, for example, if I was grading some scores on something and I needed it to be over 80 but under 90. Near enough is good enough. But in the case of what you're doing with products or services or client codes that you're pulling out of an accounting software, it will probably be a product code or something along those lines that needs an exact match. So before we actually start, we want to make this easier because this is the range of cells that we're going to need to reference in our formula. And rather than having to type in G9 to H15 every time or to lock those cells so that they don't move, so we've selected this range of cells, we come up here and we type in list. 32 characters in length, no spaces, but you can use underscores. So now it means when we reference this formula, it'll make things easy. So we click in the description box, we click FX to insert the function. And we're looking for VLOOKUP. So what are we looking up? We're looking up the item code here. Where do we want to look for it? We want to look for it in the list. You can see on the right hand side that it's found the list and it's populating the information. You'll also notice how neat and clean the formula looks. What column is the answer I want in? It's in the second column. And you'll notice range lookup isn't bold like the other options. That's because this is optional. So if we put in the word false, if it doesn't find an exact match, it'll come up with an error message. Or we could also type in just the letter 0 or the number 0 and click OK. So you can see it's picked this item up from over here. And in the real world, this list of data would probably live on another worksheet and I would hide that worksheet so somebody can't accidentally get in there and change something. And I fill the formula down. So let's just say one of these numbers changes. You'll notice that it automatically updates the list and gives you an error message because it can't find it. Now this looks much neater when you're troubleshooting than having G9 to H15, because if I had this here and this data was on another worksheet, I would be guessing and assuming that this is correct. Whereas with list sitting here, I know that that is correct. That is my list. I've highlighted it, there it is, list. So that's all good. It makes troubleshooting formulas much easier. So that's looking at range naming and VLOOKUP. So two really useful formulas. Now the final thing we're going to cover in our webinar today is a feature in Excel that's one of my favorites, and that is called macros. And a macro is basically a shortcut way of doing something that you might do on a regular basis. So this is really handy if you pull data out of an accounting system and what you need to do is the same every single time. So maybe you need to unmerge cells, maybe you need to remove some formatting, maybe you need to remove blank rows and they're always in the same space. Then a macro could work for you. The beauty of this is it also enables you to fast track processes. So let's have a look at how a macro works. So if we go to View, Macros, Record Macro. We're going to give the macro a name. We're going to call it Tidy Up. No spaces, but you can use underscores. You want it stored in the personal macro workbook because that means anytime you're using Excel, this macro will be available. So we click OK. So everything I'm doing is now being recorded in Visual Basic Code. You don't need to know how to edit it. You just need to know if it doesn't work, try again. So we're going to delete these two columns and I'll also delete this one. I want to come to the Home tab and I want to sort and filter. I want to filter this list so that only AMP shows. So that's all I want my macro to do. So if I go to View, Macros, Stop Recording. Now I'm going to close this file down without saving and then reopen it. If it asks you to save your changes to the file, say don't save, but if it asks you to save your changes to the macro workbook, yes, you do want to save them. So now what I'm going to do is I've closed that file down and I'm going to reopen it again. So here's our macro with the raw data. So you can see it's still got the columns here and it doesn't have AMP. So now I need to test to make sure the macro works. So if I go to View, Macros, View Macros. There's my macro and we click Run. As you can see, fairly quick. It's just a matter of recording all the steps you currently do. Now the final step, if this was a report that you did on a regular basis, rather than having to go to view macros, and run the macro, you could come up here to your quick access toolbar and choose more commands. And from here, there's a category called macros, where you could select your macro and add it to the quick access toolbar. You can choose modify to put a happy face on it instead, and you can choose the display text at the bottom. And OK. So now I have the icon up here, and when I rest my mouse pointer on it, it says tidy up. So next time I want to use the macro, all I need to do is click up there on the quick access toolbar. I don't need to go to view macros, and run the macro.
So that's our Word and Excel 2016-365 webinar. If you'd like to purchase the accompanying workbook with step-by-step instructions for only $9.95, go to www.donnahanson.com.au/YouTube WB for workbook. Thanks for joining, and I hope to see you soon.